Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar tonight. While you come in and join, if you wouldn't mind responding to this poll, this URL listed up above, just to say where you're located. We love seeing where everyone is from as you come in and join this. Give it just a few more seconds to respond. Nice seeing that there's a few people everywhere in the US. Hopefully we'll get some more people from other places in the world as well joining us tonight. And regardless, this will be recorded for those who weren't able to join us. Great, and welcome again to this webinar as part of our Robots to the Rescue series, as part of our design challenge. We're excited to have you all here. This is our third webinar so far. Tonight, I'm Mackenzie Brunel. I'm an academic application engineer at PTC, so I'll be speaking to you to give this introduction. I'm actually an FRC alum, and then I volunteer as an FTAA and then mentor a team here in Boston. I'll also be joined by my colleague Bradley as he gives more of an introduction into going technically into using Onshape, and then Mark Shelley will be in the chat talking to you and answering any of your questions that you have throughout the session. So tonight's agenda, I'll give a quick overview about the competition and give some clarifications. And then Brad will be talking about migrating from another CAD system, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And again, feel free to ask as we go along, but then we'll also take that time at the end to answer some of your questions on the air. And so if you haven't heard about this design challenge yet, it's designing a robot that solves a current world problem. So we highly encourage you and your team to sign up for this if you're interested and just want something to do during this interesting period of time, or you might have a little bit of extra time when you would have been competing. You can find the rules and guidelines for this competition on our website. You can also ask for any clarifications if you're wondering anything. This is our first time putting this on, so absolutely feel free to email us if you're wondering anything about these rules at first@ptc.com. And just a few clarifications because we have been receiving some emails. For alliances, a lot of people have been asking about the purpose of alliances, and that's really to get teams working together. I know that's one of my favorite things during the season is getting to actually interface with other teams, and that's one of the great things about FIRST is that cooperation and gracious professionalism. We really want to encourage that by allowing you to work with another team, whether it's in the FRC or FTC program. It doesn't have to be in your same program, and it can be any number of teams. You'll each submit your own robot, but then you'll be scored individually. So you'll all get that alliance bonus if you look at our judging rubric that's on the website, but you'll get your own robot score. And then we've also gotten some questions about the robot requirements. For the size constraints, one question that we keep getting is for FRC specifically, with the height requirement, that's not just a starting configuration, that is at all times, that is the height limit. I don't remember exactly what that number is, but you can't go any above that. But then in the horizontal direction is where you can actually go outside of that frame perimeter. If you have any questions about that, again, feel free to keep emailing us with any of those questions. And then we've gotten some questions about what's actually allowed. So for FTC, you can look at the Skystone manual. The only section that we're really focusing on is 732, where there's the allowed materials. So if you're wondering things like, can you hold a liquid or any of those other things that are outside of that section of the manual, those are completely valid. Same thing with FRC. Outside of the motors and actuators, everything in the manual is completely valid. It might be something that typically isn't safe on a game field, but it's okay in this competition because these robots aren't going to actually be playing with each other and you won't have the ability to actually hurt another robot. So for example, there's rules about something being too sharp because it might hurt another robot. If you need something to be sharp to, I don't know, whether it's cutting something or whatever other use case you might have, that's perfectly fine. Just looking at those two sections of the manual. And then for the standard electrical and pneumatic components, you can see the judging rubrics that those are highly encouraged. You don't have to do them. I would suggest that you look at the rubric to see how those are scored to decide what you want to do there. And so we do have quite a few resources for you as your team might be getting started in Onshape. There's a great learning center that Onshape has. And so if you're new to CAD, we have a learning pathway for that. Or if you're familiar with CAD, there's a separate learning pathway that we suggest for you. And then as far as parts libraries go, there's an MK CAD part library that is great for FRC that has a lot of those frequently used components. And then FTC, there's another library that you can email us for access to. And you can look at the webinar from this past Tuesday to see that FRC parts library, and then next Tuesday we'll be going into the FTC part library. And then some important dates, just a reminder, May 1st we'll be giving you that submission form, and then you can submit on May 15th, or by May 15th. That's gonna be the deadline. And then throughout that whole period, we're gonna have several webinars for you to listen to. And so just a reminder, we've had some webinars already. You can find all of those recordings on the PTC YouTube channel. So I highly encourage you to do that and share those with your teammates if they didn't get the chance to join. So we already talked about the introduction to Onshape, working with the FRC kit of parts. And then tonight we're going to be going into the migrating from another CAD system. Coming up, we're going to have the FTC kit, collaborating and versioning, a panel of teams that can just give some general tips and tricks that they've learned as they've used Onshape in the past. We'll have a session on preparing your submission for the Robots to the Rescue challenge. And then we'll have a last Q&A session where you can just ask us questions before you submit, whether those are technical questions about using Onshape or about the actual submission process. So definitely be checking your emails for those registration links or sign up on our website for this. And if you have any questions throughout this, definitely feel free to use the chat or email us at first@ptc.com. And so one other poll question for you, just wondering how many years you've been using CAD. If you've been using CAD, or maybe your team's using it and you don't have any experience, just wondering that. You can answer the poll at this URL here at the top. We've got some experienced people on here as well as some who aren't. So that's definitely interesting to see. Exciting to get some people that are in all levels. And again, for both sides of the aisle, we do have some great pathways in our learning center that are good for people who are just transitioning or that haven't been using any CAD at all. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at those resources as you're getting started. And then for the teams that don't usually use CAD, I know Onshape is a great tool because you can use it on any device. I know for my school, we had MacBooks, so I wasn't able to do CAD when I was in school. We did a lot of prototype first and check it later. So definitely great to be able to use Onshape with more people on your team since you can use it on all those platforms. But I think now we'll switch it over to Bradley to actually go into how you would switch CAD platforms.
Awesome. Thank you, Mackenzie. So let me get my screen sharing really quickly. One second. Oh, had it. There we go. Perfect. So my name is Bradley Solon. I'm a senior technical services engineer over at Onshape. I've been with Onshape for a little bit more than 4 years now. My main role is helping customers migrate over to the system from existing CAD systems, the traditional one being SolidWorks. So I have some good experience with this kind of thing. What I'm going to do today is do a quick introduction over to what Onshape is, and then walk through what a migration would look like for an FRC team. It looks like there are some webinars following up to go over collaboration and versioning specifically. So I'm going to try not to spoil that one. I'll try to stay away from it and just focus more on the migration side, some things to look at as you get started, and to make sure to pay attention to. So for those that don't know, Onshape is a cloud-based CAD system. It can be accessed through any browser. I'm actually on a PC right now. I typically work off of a Mac or an iPad, but I'm on my home PC today. But the interface stays exactly the same. CAD.onshape.com is how you sign in. If you don't have an account yet, you can always go to CAD or onshape.com on my autofills /edu. and get started with your education plan right away. This is being seen as the standard tier from our professional licensings. You don't have to worry about that. I'll show you what's important, especially when it comes to getting started within the system. Within Onshape, the biggest differences from us and other CAD systems are the fact that we're database driven, not file based driven. You're not actually saving files to your desktop. And that's very important, especially when you consider migrating over the system, because then organizing, setting up your environment will be a little bit different than what you might be used to. So that'll play a very important role as we get going. One of the examples I want to show off is actually a Raspberry Pi case I've been working on, just to show a few things about the environment. Of course, it can hold your part designs, your assemblies, and your drawings, but it can also hold more information than that. It can hold things like images, PDF files for specs, other pieces of data around your FRC designs. So you could have all the documents like the grading rubric for the challenge here, and even some of the scoping and even rule books can be imported in and tied to the designs you're working on. So let's actually take a step back and just walk through the setup of your Onshape account, how you want to get your team established, and a few important things to take note of. When you first log into Onshape, this will be your view. You probably won't have as fleshed out of a design space as I do, but from left to right, you're going to have your Onshape logo. This will actually send you, this is your home button. It sends you back to this main view. Searching, this will be very important, and is really the main goal of why we set up an Onshape account a specific way, to make searching and finding your parts very easy. And then going across the top, the really important one will be the Learning Center and the question mark icon. This is where you can get help, go through our help index, access our Learning Center, see our keyboard shortcuts, all that good stuff. But when you first get into the system, if you are experienced with another CAD system, you'll definitely want to click on your name in the top right, go to your account, and look at your personal preferences. This is probably the most important thing to really go and set up, and especially from a team-wide standpoint as well. You want to make sure to change the units to the standard units that your team is using, hopefully mainly millimeter. From here, we'll again be able to choose how the mouse actually works in the environment. Onshape's default mouse control settings actually uses the right mouse button to rotate, where other CAD systems tend to use the middle mouse button to rotate. So you might want to come here first, change these settings to what you're used to, and make sure to save that. And this is really where you want to get set up and going, and you should be able to hit the ground running from here. Now, if you're the first person or the team captain or one of the adults that's helping out with these projects, the first thing to do in terms of setting up your Onshape team for success is to actually create what we call a team in the system. This is where we get people involved. This is where we can add your entire group together to hit the ground running. So you're going to go to your account, select teams, and create a new one. In this case, we can just use naming like our FRC team number for 2020. You can choose to give a description, so anyone that gets joined onto this, or if you have multiple teams like I do, it's very easy to quickly understand what this is referencing to, what it's being used for. And then from here, we can go and add all of our other users. So I can start to, add my other Onshape accounts and choose to add them as members or admins. For this specific use case, I actually recommend adding everyone as admins. That way they can actually add other people to the team as well. Admins just controls who is added or subtracted from a team. Members are just added and then receive information that's shared with the team. So if you want to be able to add as many people as you can, especially in a more disassociated environment where you're not all in the same room, making everyone a member for now is probably a good point to get going off of, just so you can make sure everyone's included within that team setting. Now that we have our team created, we're actually going to come back to our main Onshape account and create a project folder for this group. So Onshape does have a foldering structure for organizing a group of documents that we're working with. In this case, we can do a very similar thing, where we just call this our FRC team 123 for 2020. And just like I have my common components, my other projects, we now see that added to the environment. As you'll see with Onshape collaboration and versioning in a later webinar, just like Google Docs as well, I can actually right click and share this entire folder. And I'll do so with the team I just created. And I'll probably want to make sure everyone's able to edit, probably export, definitely make sure to check the link icon, the link button, For those that know Onshape, this is very important for referencing data across documents, and then definitely commenting and probably sharing as well. But now what this means is as I add people to my team, they'll have access to this entire folder moving forward. I don't have to worry about new data getting added and somebody missing it. So this is a very important control point as we get going. Now that we go inside of my folder, anything added here again will be shared with the entire team as a whole, and I can start to structure it as I like. I'll take a quick step back just to show off a public project. This can be found in the Onshape public space. It's a mountain bike project. This really shows off the organization structure that we can set up. This will be very dependent on how the team wants to operate. Of course, if you're iterating very quickly, it might get a little messy at times, but that's okay. Things can always get moved around and cleaned back up later on. For me, the important thing though is definitely naming conventions, both so you can easily navigate around your designs and also find things later on. So if I go inside my pedal assembly folder, you'll notice the document name still has that top level folder name and then whatever the document focus is. So it could be subsystems, assemblies, things like that, or just mainframe designs or components tied around that. As we're working and bringing data in, you can always do a few things like tie this to your Google Drive account. Again, this is from our personal preferences settings. You'll see an integrations tab here. So maybe all your CAD data is already being used in a Google Drive account. Perfect. Connect that through Onshape, and then it also makes migrating data even easier. But now if we go into my FRC team folder, I can start to import my existing projects. Now, I don't want to give away any ideas or help anyone with their design, so I'm actually going to import a Lego design from a Mindstorms project that I worked on. And I actually have that downloaded to my desktop here. Now, when I click on the file from my downloads folder and I bring it into Onshape, we have several ways that we can import data. As you learn and find out more about Onshape, you'll start to understand the structure of how design happens. It is definitely not always the best case to have everything designed within one document. If you're used to other CAD systems, it's like having 500 features in one part file. It tends to slow down and can cause problems later on down the road as you try to iterate very quickly to get your designs over that finish line. So always starting from a solid foundation is very important. And that's why when you're importing things, in this case, I'm importing a top level assembly, it's always a good place to actually split them out into multiple documents. Now, when I do this, I'm importing a Parasolid assembly file. This could also be a SolidWorks pack and go, a step assembly file, anything like that. I'm choosing to split this into multiple documents. What this is going to do is take each individual part, have it set out as its own separate document. I can then choose to move those to, say, a common components folder. As you guys learned about common folders with the MK CAD library, that can be very useful for quickly grabbing things and reusing them on the fly. Now, what Onshape is doing is it's uploading the data and then starting to part it out. We'll start to see this list grow, but you'll start to see each individual part separated by just Lego bricks, Lego pieces. So in this case, we'll see our 7 module gray piece with the 7 holes in it. And we'll just look at one more, our double connector peg, to give you a sense of what you're looking at. Perfect. That way now these can be easily found, grabbed and used at an assembly level. It looks like this still may be loading. Oh, here it is. Here's the top level assembly. And you can see how fast Onshape's taking all this in, right? It's actually reorganizing all the documents. I don't really have much of a subassembly structure in this assembly. That's why they're all kind of getting blown out in a flat order. But I do have things like our main brick and this phone holder subassembly that were organized in a little bit of a fashion. But we now see here all of these are linked in their own separate pieces. And when I go to the insert dialog to add new parts to my assembly, I can actually go to my created by me and find all of them right there, easy to grab, add in, and keep working on my designs. So this is why we like having things separated out. Since Onshape isn't file-based, if you do import everything into one level, I'll actually show off what that looks like, because it's always something good to see. We're gonna come in here and import that same file again. But now I'm going to choose to import it into a single document. And now we only see one document in Onshape with that XT file. And a side note, as you're importing, every single file you bring in, we always maintain a copy of that original file. It's this little tab under a CAD imports folder, so you can always re-download it if you ever need to. For whatever case, we're always maintaining that data integrity so that you can go and utilize. Now, when I import this into one document, we see everything that we're used to, both all the sub-assemblies that we just saw, but every single part, like as a part file in other CAD systems, gets jumbled together in one part studio of Onshape. And this isn't always the best or easiest to sort through. There are valid use cases, again, for doing it like this in order to modify parts that work very quickly. But for the most part, for a first project, it definitely makes sense to keep things organized, especially if you want to go and reuse those models. So bring it in as a top level assembly can be very, very useful. Now, I will point you to our Learning Center to look into creating common components folders. Again, you guys can look back at the webinar recording from the other day as well. But if you do go to our Learning Center, there's a very good write-up that I did around setting this up for reusability. It also goes through kind of importing parts like a ball bearing and reducing them down to one component. And you can find that here, best practices for managing custom libraries. Now, before I move forward, can we see if there's any questions just around the importing side of things? This can be pretty important. Now, if we look at an individual part, while we're looking for any questions, when it comes to importing, you will notice that there is no feature tree from the other CAD system. That is okay within Onshape. What we're looking for is to make sure that there are no faults, we don't have a red feature, and this is seen as a solid part. We do have a lot of good ways to diagnose this, to look into this. If you ever see that, definitely use the Onshape support. Come in here, I think in the education says file a bug. Same thing, it gets to our support team, we can help clean it up or give you further instructions on how to do so.
All right, so we're starting to see some questions come in. Brett, I'm just noticing some flickering on your screen as you switch between windows. Maybe reshare your screen. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, that's my fault.
Not sure what's going on there. So the first question is, what are the supported types of files for importing?
Let me reshare my screen really quick. I'm gonna do my entire monitor. And that should help with the screen flickering, that's my fault.
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. So the supported file formats is pretty much all of them. The biggest caveat will be for things like a SolidWorks assembly. We do require you that you go through the pack and go process to get that data out. We do import things like STL files. Just remember, STL files are unique file formats, so we can't actually modify them specifically. But if you go into our help index and go to import, we can actually see the full listing of supported file formats as well. And it's pretty comprehensive when we get over to this. But ProE, CATIA, where's the supported file formats? There it is. So of course, non-CAD files, and then when we look at the part files and the assembly files, it's pretty comprehensive from CATIA to STEP, IGES, NX. We cover most of the major CAD systems there. Inventor.
Looks like all the questions we have right now, but if anyone else has anything, the Q&A section in GoToWebinar, and we'll get to them.
Awesome. So after importing, there might be a few things we need to do to modify the imported data. Again, as we're switching CAD systems, you do lose the feature tree, or if you're just pulling from a third-party vendor site, you might want to do some things to this design. This is where Onshape becomes very unique, because we're actually able to do a lot to these designs, even though we have no previous feature history to it. That's where direct editing comes into play. You'll notice a few features are kind of organized if you're looking at the default toolbar in a section of 4 here. That's called replace face, move face, delete face, and modify fillet. These will become very important if you ever need to modify imported data, either to just completely delete something and re-add a new component, or to do a little bit of an adjustment as you need. So in this case, let's say we got an updated design of this Lego. I believe this was a motor assembly, and this top mounting bracket was actually no longer there from the 2020 version, let's say, and I want to delete this completely. I can actually use a delete or move face command to wipe it out, or this one's a little bit easier just to do an extrude remove. I can do an extrude remove through all, wipe everything out, and do the same thing for these three faces. Extrude remove through all, and make sure the merge scope is selected with everything, so it's doing like a Boolean remove here, just wiping it all out. Now I've completely cleared it out. I've maintained a nice flat face to work with, and we're no longer having any issues. At the same time, maybe we need to move a few pieces, whether this hole is positioned in the wrong place, or I want to drill a new hole, so I'm just going to offset it its original design. That's where the move face will become very important. This will actually allow you to do face manipulation and imported data, and really play with it as you see fit. So in this case, I want to actually slide this location a little bit forward. For whatever the use case is, we want more forward mounting position on this design. So I can actually come in here and type in the value that I need to. Maybe I'm just redrilling and don't want to have too much extra noise on my CAD design. Now, what's nice about this direct editing is if I'm doing this and this was already assembled, we would do a pretty good job of having the assembly pick this up, especially with mates in the design process. So this can help just prevent you having to redo a lot of work as well. As you're working with this imported data, you might also notice that maybe it wasn't named, especially if it's coming from a vendor site, or if you were just moving very quickly through your original CAD system and didn't have time to catch up with the metadata. Renaming things and adding a few components will be very important. As you might have seen with the MK-CAD library, they do a few things like name, color, material at the bare minimum, especially if you're trying to get your weights right and find a proper balance there. So you can always right-click on your part and modify the properties. So I'm right-clicking and then left-clicking on properties. This is where I can change the name. This we'll call just our motor. Maybe give it a description. Lego Mindstorms. Maybe a part number for my team if we want to. And then after I apply that, I'll come back to the part design, right-click and say assign material. And we'll just do ABS plastic for this one. That way, whenever I go back to that top level assembly, Onshape's automatic bill of materials will start to pick up and collate all this information. And I'll add my name column as well. I'll also add my material column. And we'll start to be able to see the information that we need, including the counts, which will be very important. Now, what's nice about the simultaneous bill of materials is I can actually just go down this list. We see the cross highlighting and start to fill out this information as we go through it. So this is also a very quick way to clean up some of the design as we go through this. Again, you have to have edit permissions in order to do this type of work. That's why the folder sharing and sharing with the team will be very important, especially as you add people in, because they might join a little bit later on from the start of the project date. Now, at the same time, we do have these things with direct editing that can be very important. I'll show off a few more actions for the move face as well. So with the move face command, we can offset faces, so I can bring this entire face and pull it up further if I need to. And there are some limitations, right? It can't go past the face of this other step, but I can click on that and extend the whole thing out as well. This just has to do with the parasolid kernel and the math behind how 3D geometry is created, but we can still get quite a lot done. I can also translate, as we saw at the hole, I'm actually physically taking an object and moving it. Within the move face command, we do have this selection tool, which can be very important. It allows me to pick up things like hole protrusion. So I can take this entire segment of the Lego piece, add it to my selection, and actually physically move its location. So I want to slide this down just a little bit, and I might be missing a few selections here. Let's add the interface. And I can start to play with it, slide it down as we need and see fit in the design process. And then there's a rotation aspect here too. We'll clear my selections. If I want to take this hole now and actually rotate it about an axis, I can actually pick a circular axis and spin that around to any degree I need and control that design as we move forward. If you are importing from a source that could be just an outside vendor and you do need to clean up a model, that's where delete face will become very important. This will start to help you clean up the design. Maybe you want to just reset it as we go forward. So I'm going to go to a heel and cap in the design process. And we'll see how I'm starting to solidify this entire body for me to move forward. Now, the before and after slider and features will be very important to help you confirm what you're doing to make sure you're happy with it. In this case, I'm getting rid of that little boss insert, extending it out, and then deleting the inside cylindrical face completely closes this up for me. Really, a lot of it's for detailing, how you want to clean up your design, simplify it, especially from a nice starting point. So as you continue moving forward, the details don't get in your way. You're not focusing on them, because from getting just an assembly and functional motion in place, that's probably the first goal. And then starting to fine tune it, I'd say would be a good secondary goal. And remember, this is all happening in a part studio, not an assembly. Especially when you import, you might catch yourself in the assembly view, especially when you have something sorted out like we did, import into separate documents. So if you do end up at the top level assembly, some quick navigation tips. I want to go and modify this part. Perfect. It's now selected. I see that here. I can right click and say open linked document. That's why having linked document access is very important. It'll give you access right to the space that was happening. And now I'm in the part studio for this specific piece, this angular beam. I'm hitting P to hide my planes, get them out of my view. And then again, I can come in here. You'll learn about versions in a second, in a future webinar, so I'll ignore that for now. And do another direct editing piece to clean this up. So again, we'll just enclose this entire action, solid it up, and then I'll choose to just version it again. Hit the browser back button to get back to that top level assembly. Since we're in a browser, you can actually use the back navigation. It's not going to undo your work. Onshape's automatically saving changes as you go in the design process. We can come back to this piece and actually update that link document. And see those changes come through. Any questions here?
Yeah, we've got a couple that have come in.
Awesome.
So the first one is there any support for importing Inventor 2020 or 2021 on the roadmap?
Ooh, very good question. So I know we're usually just slightly behind. 2019 is there. I'd suspect 2020 is coming pretty quickly. If you want to submit a support ticket and ask, feel free to, or I'd say just import and try. A lot of the times it's just if new features that are different from Inventor 2019 that you see to have issues with importing process. So if you have a 2020 file, give it a shot, see what happens. And let me know, because I'm interested.
Yeah. Is there a way to change the properties of multiple imported parts at once?
Yes, very good question. So this will have to be either from the bill of materials point of view, again at the top level assembly, or if you did import everything or have multiple items in one part studio. So most of the property modification, things like the name description, happens at the part studio level, because part studios are where parts are created, and that's where you apply the properties at that state. So if I go back to my second import attempt, and we go to this part studio here, we see 26 parts listed. I can just do a bulk selection, right click and say properties. And now I'm assigning properties for all 10 parts. You'll see it has multiple values here. So I want to give them all the same name. I can do so, give them the same vendor. Shout out to CAD and project, our FRC team. And now all of those parts, you'll see on the left screen in the background, they got modified to match that. So we do have persistent selection. So I can select just by left clicking. All of these, hitting the space bar will clear my selections, or double clicking into empty space will clear them as well. Or if I accidentally make a selection, I can just left click to deselect that one individual piece. And of course we have, full shift selection for a broad range if you want to do a whole grouping. Very good question.
Excellent. And then the last question here so far is, do you have the option to sketch on an imported part?
Of course. So this is the really powerful thing about Onshape's import process. I brought up a lot in terms of the direct editing, but you're not limited there. You're still in a part studio, even though you see the import feature not much, you still have all the features at the top of your feature tree. So now if you want to take a piece and maybe you're welding an extra bracket onto it for a specific mounting situation, or doing some screw assembly to, again, screw in a bracket, you can now go and design those pieces together. This is the key differentiator between Onshape and other systems. We allow for a very powerful top-down multi-body design approach. So I'm now creating a sketch on the face of this imported part. I did Shift S to start a sketch. I clicked on the face for my sketch plane. I then hit the N key to view normal to my screen. And then I can use the L key to start my line tool. Hitting the escape bar does get me out of any of my actions. So I can hit L, start to design some sort of bracket. I'm just left clicking, and it provides a continuous chain of lines for me to work with. If I click, drag, and release, that just gives me one line. And as I automatically enclose a profile, Onshape is smart enough to know I can start to extrude that. So let's wipe all this out. I now have a bracket I want to extrude. I can come in here, hit Shift E to start an extrusion. And then it'll take any enclosed profile in the sketch I just created and start to work off of it. And I can hit the ground running. In this case too, I now see two independent parts in my part list on the left. Both of these parts are completely separate from each other. There's no extra step required to save them out independently. Again, this is the flexibility of Onshape not being file-based. So I can immediately use them if I create an assembly here on their own. There's no extra step required to break them out. Here's part two, separate from the design I was using as my starting point. And then we can do some unique things, right? I can start to create singular mounting holes that can go through both of those parts. I'm going to do an extrude remove. We'll do a blind remove, and we'll make sure it affects both parts in the design. And you can see it push through both parts as I change its depth. And now we're good to go.
Excellent. And then one more question came in. How do you derive the imported sketch to manipulate it?
How do you derive the imported sketch?
I think it's referring to if you were to do a sketch in something like Inventor and import.
Yep. So we don't really allow for the import of sketches. You can bring them in as DXF files, DWG files. Actually, no, we can't. It's a little bit different from this process, but I'll walk through what it looks like. So let's create a sketch to work with first. And you'll see a few fun things about Onshape as well while I do this. So let's just create some sort of sketch pattern that I want to use. This looks good. We'll add some sort of circular piece. Awesome. So sketch 3, I can actually right click and say export as DXF DWG. So you have to export that sketch from the other CAD system as a DXF file. going to store that and download it. You can also store it just in a tab in Onshape, which is a cool fact. Onshape, again, can also act as just like a Google Drive for you. So I now have that DXF file stored here. Or of course you store it in another, just in your downloads folder. We then choose to re-import it. And I'll just download this to show that off from scratch. So export as DXF, download to my actual downloads folder. Hit the plus sign to re-import it. And we're gonna hit the ground running. We now have that DXF file brought in. Again, it's the same one I just created there. We can kind of see the preview of it there. And now when I go to any other Part Studio, when I have to create a sketch first to do this, so it's one of the sketch toolbar options. You're going to notice towards the center a DXF option. It might default to images. It depends on what you used last, or I think the default's just images. But you'll see DXF, DWG, or image. You can then come in and actually reference that design, and it does bring it into the system. One important thing to note, though, is the sketch constraints are no longer there. So these, even if they were dimensioned to lock down in the other CAD system, I can pull them apart, and they do become very fragile. That is still okay, because we have a few tools to help out with this. I can highlight all of those sketch entities, right-click, and then choose to transform. I have to right-click on a sketch entity and transform those entities. It gives me a triad manipulator similar to what you might see in the assembly space that I can then use to drag this around. Before you actually drag it around, though, you can actually choose where your setup point is. So there's this little dot, and I want the midpoint of the bottom of this line to actually move to the origin point of my Part Studio. So I'm going to put the dot there, and that's my locator. I can then move the entire sketch piece around, and it'll start to snap to existing geometry. So if you have like a logo for your team, and you want to locate it on a part and actually etch that out, that's the very typical use case for this. It'll reposition all of the designs from that DXF, and then you can choose to use a fixed constraint on all these components, all these sketch entities. That'll then turn them black like they are defined, and so they can't be separated, you can't break the profiles, and go from there. We do have a few tech tips around this. Onshape, tech. Usually Google can pull it up pretty quick. I made this one, I think. Tech tip logo. There we go. So there's two of them. I think the one to help with just moving around imported DXF sketches would be the one for logos. Definitely check this one out. And there should be a second one just on, I think it's converting 2D files to 3D. It goes through a very similar process for actually creating an entire part off of an old drawing. Oh, it's a very good question.
The next one is off of, it's basically a statement. I saw a person derive a sketch from an MKCAD document and change it for his project. Can you do that with the Lego? So I think this is referring to using imported geometry to project a sketch off of it.
Yes. So this is pretty cool as well. We'll actually just wipe everything out that I've done here. So if I already know this part exists and I want to copy it, use it, you can actually right-click on a flat face and export that flat face as a DXF DWG. This is very useful if you're doing things like laser cutting. If you want to get that face profile to get into your laser cutter. This is also good if you want to take a part design and utilize it as well. So I can export that entire face. We'll download it. Re-import it into my design. And then just as we walk through, start a new sketch. Insert that DXF. I believe it's this one, and hit the ground running. Then I can start to add new things to the profile. Maybe we don't need this hole. We want to do every other. We can start to go at it like that and make the proper modifications we want. What they might not have shown is you still do lose those constraints. So a quick tip if you want to really take the time to walk through all this, is you can move it away, then retouch it. That does then apply that coincident constraint. So now these two edges are tied together, and you can kind of walk through the entire thing and kind of touch them like that. But that is a little bit time consuming. So I would recommend, and you can kind of see it gets messed up from once in a while. Undo will be very important if you want to take the time for this process. That's why I do like just highlighting even subsections, right? When I highlight this component, right click and say transform sketch entities and move this wherever we need to. Again, I'll put my locator in the center first and then shift this down or move it as I see fit. You might say, hey, Brad, why aren't you trimming this? We can trim this. Onshape doesn't care as much about trimming profiles, but I can hit the M key for the trim tool and kind of cap that off if I want to as well.
All right, and that's all the questions we have right now.
Excellent. So as we're migrating into the system, really those are the big things in terms of getting your data organized, the importing process. Definitely aim to have everything separate. When you're importing into Onshape first, when you design natively in the system, it might make sense to keep things designed together, but just from an organizational standpoint, making it easier to find what you're looking for, that can be very important. Some of the properties you should look at, and really for a first team, I think all that really matters would be the project name, the description, the actual name of the part, and its material property. There are a lot of properties to Onshape. So if I finish the sketch, right click on this part and look at properties, there is a long listing of them. Don't get caught up in adding every single property field there. Really name, description, maybe project will be very useful when you get into an assembly. This can help you in a pinch. I'm looking for, at my other documents, I want to find a specific part. We can actually filter. You can toggle this advanced filtering option and filter by description. So I know if I filter by April 2019, that's part of the description I had for that mountain bike project. I'm probably going to find a lot of those parts, a lot of those documents here, and we start to see them pull up there, right? My main assembly, my wheels folder, my pedal assembly. That's part of the description I used for this mountain bike project. So in a pinch, if you forget, any little detail will be important. So description will be a big winner there. Don't forget as well, we already have a lot of standard content within Onshape, nuts, bolts, washers, pen fasteners, things like that. So don't worry too much about importing that data. Onshape does have a very good standard content tool just built right in. ANSI, ISO, BIM, SAE. You're probably just focused on ISO. Come in here, find your nuts, find your bolts, hit the ground running. One very nice thing about all this, if I actually just bring this in, we'll fix this. I know it's not a good use case, but it has some holes I can work with. Let's just throw in, actually let's size this. Let's see if the auto sizer works, if Lego uses a standard ISO. And it's sized to an M8, great. I can find an M8, we'll actually go to a bolt here, use that sizer tool, size the hole correctly. Oh, M4 for the inside. Sure, we'll see if that works. And then I can click on the faces and select insert. And Onshape automatically inserts the bolts flush to the face I selected. So I did the interface. That's why you see them kind of inset a little bit, but it's a very intelligent placement tool. If I click on this entire front face, it'll find all of the similar sized holes and also do the same thing. So a big time saver if you're doing a lot of common components, standard components. This is really important if you're trying to build your bill of materials for order part counts, things like that, or just the assembly process. When I hit the green checkbox, we see all those fill in for me. And these stack really well too. So I can keep this open and keep adding the other side, my washers, my nuts, and it'll stack appropriately. Onshape did a really good job making that intelligent. With that said, I think that's really it from my side of things. Organization is very important. From a common component standpoint, I recommend ordering by vendor so you know where you're ordering from, and also just makes it nice as you click through your insert dialog if you're not using the search parameters to really go through that as you go. Having folders within folders will be good from a team standpoint. If you have subsystems that a group of people wants to focus on, perfect. You'll definitely find out a lot more in the collaboration and versioning on why this will be useful down the line. If you do go to our Learning Center, we have a lot of great self-paced courses. One of them is around direct editing. There's a lot of power there to where you're not focused on redesigning data that you're getting from online or from other sources. Definitely don't waste time there. It's a common trap to get fallen into. The data's there. You might need to do a few manipulations to it. Perfect. Use direct editing. Don't recreate it from scratch if it already exists. That's just going to take time away from where you can be more innovative on your design. Awesome. I'll pass it back to you guys. Mark.
Thanks. That was awesome. And we can switch it back to Mackenzie as presenter now. And if there's any final questions here, we're definitely welcome to have it. But otherwise, Mackenzie, take us away.
Great. Thank you again, Brad. That was definitely awesome. I'm also really glad that you showed some of those extra learning resources. So as I have on the screen here, there are a lot more webinars coming up, but in between those, I definitely encourage teams to take a look at some of those other resources and learning paths and those tech tips that can really help you get started. As you showed, you can Google some of those common questions you might have, and a lot of the answers will just come right up for you. So again, I encourage you to look at all of those. But for the next couple of weeks, we do have several webinars coming up. Again, next Tuesday is going to be the working with the FTC kit of parts. And then we will have that collaboration versioning, like Brad mentioned a few times, that can definitely be really helpful for you as you're working together as a team and having multiple people working on your different designs. Then we'll have that team panel where multiple teams that have been experienced in using Onshape will come on and answer some questions and give their best tips for using it with their team. And then we'll have a session on preparing your submission, and then an office hour session where we can just answer any questions you have. And then at any time, feel free to email first@ptc.com with any additional questions that you may have. And so we're still happy to take a few more questions. We can stay on for a few more minutes if anyone has anything that they're wondering. I don't see any additional questions coming in at this time, though.
It looks like we're good, Mackenzie.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next Tuesday to learn about the FTC kit of parts, and appreciate everyone joining us again.
Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry.
Oh.
Before we jump off, we had people just say, I have a question, and they're still typing it. So while that's coming, we did get one, which is, will FEA, finite element analysis, be coming to Onshape? Brad, I don't know if you have an official answer there.
So FEA is technically already a part of Onshape. We utilize a bunch of third parties for this. You'll notice in the top right of my screen, we have an app store. So Onshape's main focus is around the CAD, the data management side of things, and we believe we like to leave the experts to doing what they're best at. So we do partner with a lot of the main FEA companies out there. So if you look at the App Store, you'll go in and see different categories for things like simulation, rendering, CAM, data management. For simulation, the ones that I'll call out will be SimSolid and SimScale. SimScale is very similar in structure to how Onshape operates. They're cloud-based, they have a website, they actually directly connect to your Onshape account, and they do have educational licenses as well. SimSolid might be a more familiar simulation name with Altair, and they're more from the professional level, but I believe they have some different pricing tiers as well around education. Definitely take a look at this. You'll notice a few different color icons on the right side. You have a dark blue for integrated cloud apps. That means they'll appear as another tab in your Onshape document. So they're cloud-based, all the rendering's done, not using your machine resources. I know from my days back in university, that was never fun to have my computer crash when I got to 99% of a simulation. With these tools, you'll never have to worry about it. The orangish colored ones are desktop apps. So that's like your typical installed simulation programs. They connect to Onshape just through a connector account. If you go to the options for most of those, it'll say sign into Onshape, and that's how you connect the two up.
Excellent, thank you. Next question is, how do I access the recorded sessions? Well, number one, you will be automatically emailed a link that has the recording. We are also posting all of these to the PTC YouTube channel. If you go on the PTC YouTube, you'll see a playlist for academic. All of these will be posted in there. We're also posting the links on Chief Delphi too. So if you are a Chief Delphi user, you can see them there too. All right, and then we have another question. This one's a little bit of a doozy, so let me talk it out. So consider I have a folder where no members have the delete privilege. If a member creates a part outside of the folder and then drags it into that folder, that member will have the ability to delete the part. Is there a way to prevent that member from being able to delete it? Is there a way to ensure that robot designed in the folder only has parts that were created in that folder?
That's a very good question. This really has to do with the permission side to Onshape. So I might need to take it offline with you just to make sure I fully understand your position. Since there are different tiers of Onshape, that does make things a little bit different depending on where you're coming from. With the standard account in Onshape, which most educational users will have, that means individuals own data. Go ahead. You're gonna say something, Mark?
Oh no, sorry, I was just adjusting my headset.
Gotcha. With my account that you see here, I have a professional account. That's where a company owns data. That's why when you see the owned by column, you'll see Solon Industries for most of my designs and another partnering company, Sassify Systems. So if I create a document as an EDU user, I'm in control of those parts and designs. No one else can see that data until I explicitly share them in, where I control that access that they have. So even if I created the document and move it into a folder that's not owned by me, I still maintain that quote unquote ownership level access to the data. So I'll have to work with you. Feel free to shoot the first at ptc.com this question. We can do a follow-up and kind of talk through it if you want. Happy to jump on the call and kind of talk through that as well. But it's really around permission management. The delete permission is really around removing tabs, parts, things like that, as you said. If you're the one creating all the data first or all the folders and documents, that's a good way to start. So if you're the team organizer, create the folder and just create blank documents to get started. That way you know you're the main owner of all the data, and then they're just designing or importing stuff into those documents as you work. So maybe preset up a few structures here, a few folders, a few documents within those folders, and have your team work within those to get started, versus moving things in. And that might be a better way for you to make sure you have the proper control that you want. Very good question.
Yep. All right, so I think I see a couple more. Yeah, we'll follow up in email there. But if there's no more, I think we can close up for tonight. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Brad, for doing that session with us. That was super helpful. Like we said, we'll post the recording on YouTube. So if you want to go back and go through it, line by line and reference some of this stuff, you can certainly do that as well. So thank you to everybody, and we'll see you all next time. Have a good one.